Neat Nation, greetings. Welcome back to the Droopy Whiskey Show. Thrilled to have you guys tonight, or this morning, or whenever, to talk a little bit about whiskey. If you clicked on this episode, you'll know it's a little unusual. Hopefully thought-provoking, hopefully helpful, but unusual. It's going to be one of those Droopy Whiskey episodes. It's talking about the elephant in the room. It's like this is a room filled with elephants, and periodically we select one to talk about, make it feel a little awkward, but in a good way. Because elephants should feel awkward if they're in rooms. Before we talk about said elephant, I need to pick out a whiskey. What should I drink tonight? I think we'll start with a little bit of suggestions of buttercream pick from Dancing Goat. This is that 8-year MGP pick we did. 21% rye bourbon. It's good stuff. It is sold out. It's no longer available, but quite good, quite good. And it is actually one of the reasons why we're going to talk about buying less whiskey today. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have bought this whiskey. Contraire. Au contraire? On the contrary, I hope you did buy it if you had a chance to, because I think it's awesome. But I've been thinking about doing this episode for a while because over the last year and a half, I have accumulated what I call an inappropriate amount of whiskey. By that, I don't mean I'm ashamed of it. I mean that for any rational human being, the amount of whiskey that I have could justifiably be considered inappropriate. You might come down into my basement and say, I think Drew has a problem. I think we need to get him some help. If you're just looking at the sheer volume / quantity / mass of my whiskey collection. And many bourbon enthusiasts might say, well, Drew, actually, I think you have a fairly reasonable amount. I mean, everything is relative, right? Odds are pretty good. If you're watching this video, you have north of 10 bottles in your collection. 10 bottles of bourbon's a lot of bourbon. Odds are actually pretty good if you're watching this. You have north of 25 bottles of bourbon in your collection. Sound off in the show notes below. Let me know how much bourbon you have and how you feel about it. It'd be an interesting conversation topic. My point for recording this tonight is not to make you feel bad about having a buttload of whiskey. I feel good about having a buttload of whiskey. But at the same time, there reaches a point where I just don't need any more. And I think there are some good reasons to slow the buying. I think there are some good reasons to slow down and stop buying as much whiskey. Now, I'm not saying you should stop buying whiskey. I'm not going to stop buying whiskey. But, just so this isn't a, hey, do as I say, not as I do thing, over the next 3 months, I'm not going to buy any bottles, with an exception. We've been doing barrel picks for Nation, and of course, I want to have a couple bottles of each barrel pick we do. So I will be buying those if any are released in the next 3 months, which I expect they will be. But beyond that, I'm not going to buy any more bottles of bourbon. Now, why? Why would I advocate for buying less bourbon? Well, there's several reasons. Number one is purely fiscal. I've talked before in the dangers of drinking bourbon is that it's hella expensive, especially if you're buying the good stuff. I mean, a bottle of the good stuff these days will run you north of 50 to 60, and it adds up. You know, if you're collecting 100 bottles, that's a lot. And some of them are quite a bit more than 60. Now, granted, I'm not saying you can't get really good whiskey for $30 these days still. You definitely can, but you probably just don't want to amass a Mondo collection of Elijah Craig 94 proof. Like, there's really no point. So if you're seeking a variety of sometimes exotic whiskeys, it adds up to the pocketbook. And I've got a wife and 3 kids. We're a single income family. Yes, I get some income from ad revenue on YouTube and from Patreon, but by and large, it kind of goes to support the time. It goes to support the Kentucky trips and Airbnbs. Not exactly making bank off of YouTube. So, I mean, I do this because I love it, but I have enough bourbon now, obviously, where I'm not hurting for stuff. I actually can make plenty of what I might call dank content if I just focus on the bottles that I have. There's this stuff, but then there's probably an equal amount of bourbon to this down below here. So tons of stuff we can get into, literally tons. And it would be great to build up the bank account because my wife and I want to do some more traveling in the future. And because money doesn't grow on trees, because we're a single income family, it doesn't make sense for me to keep spending money on bourbon. You might say, well, it's an asset. Well, it's an asset if you don't open it and then you plan to sell it, and the only way to sell it easily is illegal, and I'm out on that. So it's an asset if I want to move it through a broker down the road. That's never been my intention. Like if I end up being 65, diagnosed with terminal cancer, I'll probably give it away, or at that point I might contact a broker to sell my collection of stuff that I never got around to opening, which is in and of itself sad. So beyond the monetary, like, hey, you need to be wise with your finances, there's the, are you going to drink this stuff? Like, you might have more whiskey than you're going to drink. And at that point, I just got to ask, what is the point? Now, there may be multiple points. If you are collecting as an investor, I'm down with that. I actually have no problem with that. Some people do. I don't. I think people do that with wine. People do it with all kinds of stuff. And it's not really a problem if that's your shtick. Some people collect to swap and trade, and that's interesting too. But if you're swapping and trading, you're probably still going to have amassed a Mondo collection. And some people collect to open them all and taste them all, which is really, really cool. But at the same time, you're never going to get around to drinking all that stuff. You're just tasting a lot of stuff. And there may be a better way to taste a lot of different bourbons than just buying a lot of different bottles. Trading, samples, for instance, getting together with the boys, whiskey nights, going to a lot of bars. Like, there are cheaper ways and maybe less wasteful ways of tasting a whole lot of bourbons. And I say wasteful again because odds are pretty good you're never going to get around to drinking all of that stuff. Now, a tip, if you're like, yeah, I got 100 open bottles and I know there's no way I'm going to get, I don't even want to drink half of this stuff, is give away your good bottles that you're just not really excited to drink to members of your squad who love bourbon, who just, they're getting into it. And this is what I do, is I have several coworkers who like bourbon. They don't know bourbon, but they enjoy bourbon. And I'm like, well, I've got plenty of good stuff, just stuff that I'm not like super eager to get after because I've got some bangers on my shelf. And so I just give it away, which is, it's a way to have friends for sure. It's a way to really let people know you care for them, is giving them your extra bourbon. That can get expensive if you're giving away a couple bottles a week that you bought but don't plan to drink. So again, financial components. But so those first two reasons, there's a monetary impact on just buying a bunch of bourbon. There's the fact that you're never going to drink it. So like, maybe we should, as a society, not buy stuff we don't need as much. Again, please don't get mad. This is just meant to be thought-provoking. I know some of you are going to get mad. I know it's a little bit ironic given the amount of bourbon I have, but I've just been thinking a lot about this stuff. So consider it a thought exercise and not a judgment, okay? Let's just maybe get on the same page there. But in general, I think our society would probably be healthier if we thought a few more times before making purchases. And to that end, I think there's actually a really good reason to buy less bourbon. If you're like me, you have a big collection, or you've got quite a few bottles open. And that is, I think you'll enjoy your pours more, at least you could very well, if you're buying random bottles less. Meaning that when I go buy a bottle that I've never tried before, because it's new, because it got good reviews or whatever, there's actually a pretty decent shot I'm not going to be huge on it. There are a decent amount of bottles behind me that I'm like, meh on. I'm like, it's like I don't really have any whiskey that's bad except for a sample that I was sent once that I keep around just at some point to show somebody how awful whiskey can be at times. But I don't have bad whiskey. But I have whiskeys that I don't enjoy as much as others. Elijah Craig Barrel Proof always does it for me. Four Roses Barrel Strength Single Barrels are awesome. I love drinking those things. This store pick that I got, which I have a few bottles of, to be honest. The Spaniard pick we did with Dancing Goat. The top shelf stuff is all fantastic. So I want to drink that stuff. But if I have open bottles, I kind of feel bad, guilty not drinking the bottles. Like, I don't, again, want to be wasteful. So if I have less whiskey that I don't know I'm going to love or that I love less, I get to drink more good whiskey. And that's awesome. And once you've kind of dialed in, once you've explored bourbon a little bit and you've dialed into the whiskeys you love, like, it's fine, as I mentioned, to kind of taste, get some samples from some friends, go to bars and taste some stuff. But in terms of investing in bottles, like, doubling down on the things you dig, I think that's kind of the way to live life. Like, if you can offer me 2 whiskeys and you say you enjoy this one more, but this one's also good, which one do you want? I'm always going to go for the one I enjoy more, and that's generally what I do when I'm at home. I kind of blow through certain bottles very fast, and others will sit on the shelf for years. It's not because I'm saving them. It's because I just don't reach for them as often. In some cases, it's because I'm saving them, if they're like, this stuff. One final reason, maybe to buy less bourbon. This is a bit of a hot take. We did a live stream on Thursday night talking about Van Winkle bourbons. In general, I think they're quite good. We did Lot B, the 12-year, and then we did Old Rip Van Winkle, the 107. And we're talking about how they're good bourbons, but not worth the hype. And I said, they're not worth the hype. They're very good, but, if you really want one, pay whatever it's worth to you. And somebody commented on my video and said, like, that's the dumbest take I've ever heard of. Like, you're just blowing the hype up more. And I thought about that for a little bit. I don't think that people making YouTube videos are the ones responsible for Pappy hype. Nobody is getting and making videos about Pappy and saying, this is the best stuff ever. It's worth $1,000. Nobody's saying that. But what's driving the demand for Pappy and bourbon in general is that we're buying a crap ton of it. Bourbon enthusiasts buy way more bourbon than they need or consume. So what's creating demand is that I don't buy enough bourbon for me. I buy enough bourbon for 10 me's. So while we're saying that there's a shortage of limited release bourbons out there in the market, there's not a shortage of limited release bourbons on my shelf. Like, I don't need more limited release bourbons. Do I want more? Yes, that's because there's something broken inside of me. And I think generally among bourbon enthusiasts, they don't have a shortage of limited release bourbons on their shelf. We just keep paying more to get more. And thus, we're driving the price up, not because of YouTube, but because of our buying habits. And it's really a bizarre phenomenon, because I don't know other, industries or hobbies where people do this. I mean, in golf, people will get new clubs, but they'll get rid of their old clubs. They'll trade them in, trade up. Cars, kind of the same way. There's not just this endless amassing of stuff. Whiskey, we kind of do it because it's shelf stable and we can have more and taste more and compare more, and it looks beautiful on the shelf, and it's a lot easier to store, and it's cheaper than cars. Again, not to hate on the hobby, because I've embraced it fully and I'm into the pursuit, and I'm totally down for hunting bottles. Like, it's a reasonable hobby so long as you consume in moderation. But there is a byproduct to the amount that people who are into bourbon amass. And just having some friends, a decent amount of friends, both locally and abroad, I know how many bottles we can amass, and it's a lot. It's a lot. And most of us, pretty much any one of us watching this video, if we saw Pappy, any Van Winkle, anywhere near MSRP, we would buy it, even though we have plenty of good whiskey already. So aren't we kind of part of the problem? So I think it's worth considering taking a buying fast. Like I said, I'm doing it, but I've even qualified it. So we're doing a bourbon fast, so I'm going to buy less over 3 months as an exercise. Just like we might do a dry January, take a few weeks off of drinking. Going to take a few weeks off of buying too. That's actually something I haven't done. But it's going to be good for the pocketbook. I think it's going to be good for the psyche, where I just don't feel the pressure to buy every new whiskey, or every whiskey I have the opportunity of buying, passed on Michter's Barrel Strength Rye today, because I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to commit to this, and I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to see as we go on from there. Like, I'll probably budget better the amount of bourbon I'm buying, not because of financial need as much as just exercising some self-discipline and appreciating what I have. And one final kind of half reason for buying less whiskey / bourbon, I think, is that if you are budgeting your bourbon expenses, then it's awesome to kind of wait for an opportunity to do some good with your purchasing. And by good, I mean not buying X bottle off the shelf at Total Wine, but buying from somebody local. Or maybe not buying E.H. Taylor small batch at the Buffalo Trace gift shop, which I did. I'm gonna own that. It's good. I like it. But maybe investing in another bottle from Dancing Goat, a local place that's doing some really killer stuff that makes great whiskey that I love. If I can buy an extra bottle that I love equally and get it from somebody who's doing something local with a mission that I'm all about, I mean, that's probably worth doing. Also, there's always opportunity costs, right? I mean, there's always something else our money could go to that would, promote good and human flourishing. And we should consider that. And a lot of people in the whiskey community are very generous. So, again, this is a thought exercise. It's not a criticism, really. It's just something that I've been thinking about. There have been many whiskey fundraisers that have raised a ton of money for all kinds of stuff. Most recently, Kentucky tornado relief. Tornadoes that went through a month and a half, 2 months ago. They just did a ton of damage, but Fred Minnick and a whole bunch of other people really rallied around, donated a buttload of bourbon, raised a crap ton of money to help the relief efforts there. That's sick. That's something we should always have our eye out to do. So how do we get maybe out of our basement, out of our bar, and think about how can I, in what I'm doing, what I'm collecting, what I'm interested in, actually have an impact for the benefit of the people around me. All right, we're going to wrap it up there. Preaching over. Either later this week or Wednesday, I have a bunch of samples sent to me by Elsa, a friend of the channel, friend of the pod, and they're all Chattanooga stuff. So I'm either going to create a tasting video or I'm actually going to go live on Wednesday, just solo live before the usual entry-proof Thursday night live with Brian Bikey. Taste through a crap ton of Chattanooga whiskey samples, give you my thoughts. Hope you all have a good rest of your day. Spend some time meditating, introspective. It's going to be good. I think it'll also help you keep it neat. Cheers, everybody.